Welcome everybody to Perimenopausal Athletes and Beyond Masterclass Series number 2. Welcome to the fall. Here we are. I am so excited to bring you an incredible woman, Dr. Carla DiGirolamo. No, I totally messed that up. Okay, let me try again.
It wasn't so bad. It was actually pretty good.
Girolamo. I want to say it Italian. I want to have like this accent, like this beautiful Italian, sexy accent, and it's just not. Okay, so
hands more. That's all.
Yes, I need a little bit more hands. In any case, do you want to say your last name for us?
Sure, it's DiGirolamo.
Oh, DiGirolamo. Yeah, see, if I just am nice and calm and I say it, I probably could say it, but no, I want to say it with Italian swing. Anyway, here, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. So who is, should I go by Dr. Carla?
Whatever makes you comfortable,
okay.
Dr.
Well,
Carla.
I'm going to go with Dr. Carla just because I love it. It's Dr. Carla is a double board certified reproductive endocrinologist, obstetrician gynecologist. She is the creator of Fit for Life MD, which we're going to hear about quite a bit, I'm hoping. CrossFit level 1 trainer, certified nutrition coach. She does certified in Les Milles body combat, which is a martial arts, and a body pump instructor. She absolutely adores fitness. She has a son. She's married, has a son, has a dog. And she's also, you've transitioned to working in menopause and to, really coming into focus, and is also listed in the North American Menopause Society. Which is amazing for all of us female athletes that are in this particular phase of life. So we are here, and I was really excited to meet you and to start to get to know who you are and what you're doing. And what I'd first like to hear just a little bit more about right off the bat is we talked about you're wearing these different hats, and which hat are you going to wear when I ask you these questions? And I want you to just share a little bit, if you will, about those different hats that you're wearing and how you're trying to bring them together, and how difficult that can be right now as you are a doctor, as you are fitness, as you are a nutritionist, and what it means for us female athletes and going forward.
Sure. So my first experience really with anything was when I was a teenager. My father was a semi-pro football player, not a big guy at all, and I'm not a very big person either, but I was also a high school athlete. And so back in a time, in the 1980s, when there weren't a lot of teenage girls in the gym, my dad had me in there. He's like, look, you're a small person, that you need to train, you need to be in the best shape you can. So fitness was ingrained in me from the very, very beginning, until, from when I was old enough to work out. And I always played sports, loved team sports, and loved being in the gym. And then, education happened. I decided to go to medical school. I wanted to be a physician from a fairly early age as well. And, fitness kind of moved into the background at that point. I always went to the gym and worked out just to, stay in shape during med school and residency and all throughout. And then when I was in residency, which is a very difficult time for us because we're working really horrific hours, you're eating like crap, and you're just trying to survive basically. And fitness, unfortunately, takes a back burner. And then I went into fellowship. I had my son, and then I'm 39. I'm 30 pounds heavier than I was when I was my athletic self. I wasn't even pregnant anymore. And I'm like, I'm turning 40 in 6 months. This just can't be. Yeah. And so I was in a place in my career where I could now bring fitness back into the forefront. And so I did. And I started working out again, and it just took off. I lost 30 pounds. I'm in better shape than I was, back when I was in my 30s. And, working out myself wasn't enough. My midlife crisis was becoming a fitness instructor. It wasn't buying the sports car. It wasn't, some of the other things people do. I became a fitness instructor. I started teaching body combat. And I loved being an instructor. It was so much fun. I loved being in front of people. I loved reaching people. I loved helping people, achieve their goals. And so then after I did that for a little while, then it's like, all right, I'm 45 now. I need to amp up my fitness. And then I started CrossFit. And then I got really passionate about CrossFit. I wanted to be a CrossFit instructor. And then I came into CrossFit Health, which is where both hats came together, because CrossFit Health is a group of physicians who do CrossFit. And they were created because of the abyss that exists between the world of medicine and the world of fitness. Doctors know nothing about fitness, and fitness professionals don't know much about medicine. It's nobody's fault. It just is what it is, right? Yeah. So CrossFit Health brings the two together, because that growing abyss is problematic in keeping people healthy. Yeah. So that's kind of how my hats have come back together again. And then I became perimenopausal myself. Yeah. And I'm like getting hot flashes and, the whole weight body composition thing. I'm like, whoa, this is a real problem. And then I took Stacy Sims' Menopause for Athletes course and realized there's something we can do about this. Yeah. And then it was at that point that I was inspired to make a shift in my career. I am still a very active fertility specialist at Boston IVF. I have been for 16 years, but I am adding on the focus of now transitioning that into menopausal medicine. And that's where I will retire to once I am done at Boston IVF. I will make this full time, taking care of menopausal women and training athletes and putting that together to help women be the absolute best and healthiest they can be.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And I know when we first met, I shared with you, like my path as well, coming into this world of hormones was also through fertility and my challenges of fertility. And it's interesting that you have this depth of knowledge, which you now can come into and transition into this other massive stage of life. And for myself as well, it was Dr. Stacy Sims. So kudos to Dr. Stacy Sims for inspiring a whole generation of new ways of being. Like, it's phenomenal. So we thank her for that. Yeah. So here you are, and you are now working specifically with athletes across the lifespan, with both men and with women, but particularly you're bringing in that hormone expertise. So that's where we want to pick up now and talk about the focus of this masterclass series is saying, okay, here we are, it's end of September, depending on which hemisphere you're in, you might be thinking about how am I going to set up this next year? Or you might be planning to come into your race season in a couple of months if you're in Australia or New Zealand or on that side of the world. And how do I manage this? We have this coaches have this traditional way of thinking in terms of annual training plans. You have your base season in which we all go very long, and then you start getting more specific, and then you get into the specific, demands of the course or whichever, and then you go and you peak. It's broken up into 4. It's really clear, except for it's not when you're in perimenopause and beyond. So that's what we want to talk about today with you, and how you think, because I know you have a really unique way of because we talked about it, of thinking about this. And how do we come to a place where we are working both in health and longevity, and we are still performing at the way that we want to? And by performance, let me just be clear, I don't mean just getting to race, like start lines and racing. I mean being able to go for a hike for 3 days, or being able to go into that long distance ride because your family members decided to do it, or whatever that means for you. It means that being your best in the activities that you want to take on. So that's where I want to come into right now. This idea of we're in this place, we want to create a great year. We don't know how we're going to be with our hormones, never mind 1 month from now, never mind 8 months from now. So what do you do? How do we think about this?
So basically, Mother Nature threw away the book when she created perimenopause and menopause. So we need to throw away the book when we think about training within it. That's really what it comes down to. The things that worked when we were younger and had regular, predictable menstrual cycles. And I mean, granted, many people don't because they have other issues like polycystic ovarian syndrome or hypothalamic stuff. You know, not everybody has stone cold perfect menstrual cycles, but in general, it's different now because things are getting more chaotic, and it's because the ovarian function is changing, it's declining. And so you're making less hormones in a less predictable way. And because hormones, reproductive hormones, impact almost every system of the body, I mean, the brain, the muscles, the bones, the GI tract, all of these things, as the hormones change, all of these systems get affected. And it just manifests into these dramatic experiences that we have as perimenopausal women. So what you have to think about is, okay, the body's changing. So how do I train for that? And one of the things is many women in this age group complain about joint pain, right? A lot of us do. And what's happening as ovarian function declines and hormones decline is that you actually have estrogen receptors in your tendons and ligaments. And so when estrogen is no longer there, think about an elastic band that's nice and stretchy. And if you leave it out in the sun for 3 days, it's not so stretchy. It's a little bit tougher. And if you pull it too much, it's going to snap, right? The other thing that's happening is we are losing muscle mass, or the potential to lose muscle mass is there, because one of the big stimulants of our muscles is estrogen. There's estrogen receptors in our muscles too. And so as our tendons and ligaments start to get more lax, the joints lose a little bit of stability. As you're losing muscle mass, now the muscle masses are losing, the muscles around the joints are losing strength, and the joints become more unstable. This is why, you know, your 70-year-old mom can just fall and throw out her rotator cuff. You know, it's because the shoulder joint's not so stable, where you never hear that happening in a 30-year-old. So how do we train for that? Well, we have to think about our nutrition. Nutrition has never been so important than it is now, because you have to make sure you're getting enough protein and enough balanced nutrients to keep your muscles in a good place. Because if we're stimulating our muscles with exercise or whatever, your muscles need substrate to actually rebuild. So we think about doing more rotator cuff stability, more hip stability, more mobility. Yoga is fabulous. I do more yoga now than I ever did, and I can do things now that I couldn't do when I was 30. So yeah, exactly, because you just have to think about it differently. So muscle mass, joint stability, these are all things that change. And now these are things we have to integrate into our training. Core stability. This is a big one. This is a big principle in CrossFit. Core to extremity. All movement originates in the core and emanates out to the extremities. When we're younger and have more muscle mass, we can overcompensate and muscle a lot of stuff with our arms and with our legs and really kind of let the core sit back and not do much. Well, when we start to lose muscle mass, when the joints start to become unstable, we notice it because we have pain. And it's like, well, now the core has to step up. It's like, oh, we don't know what to do. You gotta do core training, because that's where movement is initiated. And many times as athletes, we just overcompensated with our muscles and our limbs for the lack of core strength that we have. And so that's another big thing that we as athletes need to pay attention to. Bone density, this is another thing we have to think about. For runners and endurance athletes, especially who don't do a lot of weightlifting, we got to incorporate weightlifting in there, because that is what is going to keep your bones strong as you know you go through into menopause and beyond. So those are just some different elements of what we can do to address the changes that happen as our hormone function changes with life. We kind of have to follow along with that and then figure out how to work it in.
Right. Okay. So here we are. Now we know in general, nutrition, you know, mobility, the strength training, the bone density, dynamic movement. So we know we need to do that. Now, how do we think about our year as we plan it? So what we're going to do in this interview is we're going to look at the year, and then we're going to look at the monthly and the weekly. So we're looking at off season versus on season. And can we in perimenopause, or beyond and beyond, can we think more of this base season as really working on those joints, really paying particular, like one of the things is that we know now is that, going those long endurance rides in the base season, they're not going to give us the bang for the buck. Like we will potentially, what I hear you saying is we'll get so much more by working on, all the small joints, the motor movements that will keep our core, our body strong. That's our off season.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
That's right. So it really, I think, depends on the athlete and depends on the sport, right? Mm-hmm. If you're an athlete that has 1 or 2 big races a year, you train for that race, you train with your coach, and you focus on that training just like you did when you were a younger person. But then, like you mentioned, in the off season, that's when we can kind of scale back a little bit, because you still want to run, because you're going to be running a race maybe in 6 months. I'm just using marathoners as an example. And so when you're kind of in that in between, that's when you work on this stuff. That's when you incorporate your deadlifts, your squats, your core stuff, I like functional fitness. I mean, I'm biased because I'm a CrossFit trainer, but I really like functional fitness because you can get plyometric strength and endurance in the same workout in 20 minutes. That's the beauty of CrossFit training, is because you can get it all in there in a short period of time. But when you're training for your marathon, you don't want to be doing heavy deadlifts. That's not going to help your performance. It may actually hinder it. Mm-hmm. So that's why when you're training for your race, you work with your coach, you set your timeline. Maybe it's a 6-week training cycle for the race itself. And then afterwards, you just change the paradigm, work in your certain sessions of endurance, certain number of sessions of weight training, certain number of sessions of core and mobility and yoga type stuff. And you find that balance in the off season. But when you're training for a race, you got to train for the race, because you can't fit it all in, because you got to recover. That's the other thing that we need more of as women in this age group is recovery.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You just get enough.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to touch on recovery. So what I'm wondering here is, so here we are going into September, October, and like a philosophy I use as a coach is never leave anything behind, but with the understanding that we are going to really focus in on certain elements of training at one point in time. Like we don't want to try to just do everything all the time.
Correct.
Because it's not going to serve us. So while for training, like, so you're saying if you're doing your marathon training, stay in touch with your run, because obviously you want to stay in touch with your run because it's also our soul feeding, fuel, just like CrossFit might be or whichever. But this is also a time to really pay attention to X, Y, and that's the things that you don't always have time to. This is, for triathletes, it gets really challenging when you're doing 3 sports and strength training and yoga and, like all these little pieces that you're trying to add in. But maybe we need to allow ourselves, if I'm hearing you correctly, to kind of say, all right, let's look at this bigger picture of longevity, of health. And how do we think about that now in perimenopause when we are there small changes that we need to be aware of? Like if you're in early stages of perimenopause, so you're still getting a regular cycle, but you're starting to notice hot flashes, or you're starting to notice these real high upswings of estrogen and the crashing down. So your mood is starting to change versus the end stages of perimenopause. Or, like where, estrogen has actually pretty much leveled out. You are having, a lot more length between your cycles. Does anything in your year or in the timing of that actually change any of your training? So how you do strength, how you apply some of the energy systems, or is it similar throughout? Am I clear? Like, is that question okay? Okay.
It's a great question. It's actually an area of pretty intense study right now in the reproductive age population. There is more and more research out there on training in your follicular phase, which is the beginning part of your menstrual cycle, training during your luteal phase, and what the body is better suited for during those hormonal stages. And there really is something to that. And when you are in your reproductive age and having regular cycles, that works really well. But the problem is in perimenopause, your cycles are all over the place.
Who knows? Yeah, you might not ovulate.
Yeah, you may ovulate 3 eggs in 1 month. You know, you might have something called a loop cycle where you recruit eggs twice, and then you've got this prolonged high estrogen and progesterone phase where you just feel like crap. And then everything crashes down. Then you got a bunch of hot flashes going on. So it's not something where it's going to be easy to figure out how to train from a hormonal perspective because the hormones are all over the place.
Right.
But what you got to focus on is managing those symptoms and keeping them from overtaking your life. The hot flashes are really problematic for people because it disrupts the sleep, and if your sleep is disrupted, then your recovery is disrupted and you don't feel like working out, and this is a vicious cycle. Yeah. So rather than thinking about training for your hormones like we can try to do when we're having regular cycles, we kind of have to do damage control. I mean, that's really all there is, because every woman is different, every fluctuation is different, and it's erratic. So you kind of have to say, all right, how am I going to manage recovery during this time?
Right.
And you also, from a mindset standpoint, have to understand you're going to have good days and you're going to have not so good days. And that's okay, because there's fitness to be had when you're not feeling so great. On some days, you're going to feel like you can go out and run 10 miles and not even think about it. Yeah. Other days, you're not even going to want to run one. So instead of now being fearful, because I've gone through this, my coach has worked with me on this mindset. Instead of saying, oh my God, the world is ending, I'm getting old, this is the beginning of the end, you say, all right, this is just not a good day. Yeah. And we're going to do mobility today instead. And it might just totally overhaul your whole week cycle, but that's what you need to do, because you got to find the fitness you can do on those days where you're kind of feeling like crap. And you have to be ready to be nimble to change on a moment's notice. Now that's harder when you're training for a race because you got specific stuff you got to do. But when you're in the off season, thinking about this other way you need to train, you have more flexibility. Mm-hmm. And that's how you navigate it. It's hard in perimenopause.
Yeah. I appreciate that so very, very much, because I think that it's that idea of there's always a way to get it in. Mm-hmm. I had this amazing coach, Steve Sisson, actually, and he said there's always a way. It really depends on the creativity of the coach, or, you know, like, how do we find something? And in what we are doing is we're empowering the athlete to actually find that creativity for themselves. So if you have something scheduled later on in the week, you can't get that run in, you can't get that high intensity training session in, or whatever it is, switch it out, find a new spot, and start giving yourself, don't fit yourself to the plan, make the plan fit you kind of idea. Do you think in terms of monthly schedule, so we come from this idea of this cycle of, the cyclical, high intensity, go for it, build muscle mass, first 2 weeks of, your menstrual cycle, then, ovulate, then you go into more endurance. This is what we've learned from Dr. Stacy Sims and others, and then we go into the recovery week, take it easy. And so, it's building it on the month. Now, I kind of, we have cycles all over the place. We have seasons. We have cycle of day and night. Is there, what is your thoughts on maintaining this cycle for recovery as well? If we are athletes that are in a training regime, so the difference being consistency and exercise, and maintaining exercise, and, having recovery always built into your weekly program, versus you're training hard for 2 weeks, you're going endurance for the 3rd week with a little bit of rest in between, and then you're going to take it easy. In perimenopause and beyond, do you think that there's, how do you think about that idea of cyclical training still?
I think it's tough to think about cyclical training because our bodies are not responding in a cyclical way. In menopause, this changes, because in menopause, once you have hit that point in time where you have not had a menstrual cycle for a year, the average age at which this happens is 52 in American women.
Mhm.
At that point, you lose some of that erratic fluctuation. Things are leveling out at that point. And so at least you don't have that circus going on in your body to contend with.
Yeah.
But you have other stuff you got to contend with. You got to be careful of your bones. You got to make sure you focus on bone density.
Yeah.
You got to make sure you focus on muscle mass. But you're not going to have probably as many good days and bad days as you did in perimenopause. In perimenopause, you can't predict when the good days and bad days are coming.
Right.
Going to come. So when we as coaches design programs for people, and when I work with my own coach to design my own stuff too, we set it up so that things can be shifted around and mixed and matched, or even carried over into the following week, depending on how we feel and what comes up. Because, we also are moms, we're wives, for me, I'm a physician, we have our regular jobs, and we're athletes, we all wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
So with all of that stuff in our, chaotic hormones, we need plans that are flexible, that we can get it in, but mix and match to accommodate what we're feeling and what's coming up in life.
Yeah. And what about the postmenopause? So things are even now. And do you don't have to worry so much about that hormonal flux and trying to figure out where you're going to be, because there is a stability. Then do you find the cycle again? Do you encourage the cycle to come back because we're cyclical people, or because we've had that experience for, decades of our lives?
Yeah, I think you can revisit it. Everybody's different. One thing that does happen in menopause that starts to happen in late perimenopause are those hot flashes. And even once the hormones settle out, people can have hot flashes for many years after menopause actually happens. So what you're navigating more during that early menopausal period is the hot flashes and the sleep. And sometimes it's the lack of drive. Lack of drive is a big deal too. So having a good mindset coach is another really important thing. Having good support. There's lots of good support groups out there, as you know, Celine Yeager, Hit Play Not Pause, there's lots and lots of support out there. And you need to pay attention to the mindset, because that starts to really rear its head, I think, in once we hit menopause and, starting to feel creaky more often and not sleeping so well, and feeling like I'm all washed up, and the psychology of it all.
The psychology of it. Oh, I love that. Okay, that's really important for people to know. Like we talk about that, the mood flux in perimenopause, but we don't talk about that. That's a reality for a lot of females that are in past that year of not having their period. And that because a lot of the female athletes that I know say, okay, finally I'm past this, but that's not the experience of everybody. And that if you are feeling like you are, coming down or lacking motivation or wondering, how do I get myself up again? It's not just post-COVID. It's just not COVID. It actually might be your hormones still doing their magic for you. And that can happen, is my research understanding correct? And that could happen, up to 10 years past your last period.
Sure. It's very variable. It's very variable. I mean, you'll hear reports of women having hot flashes for 20 years afterwards. That's not usual. The average 7 years is the average amount of time people will experience hot flashes. But, to your point that you made before, when things stable out, there is some relief to be found there without the fluctuations. I have, she's a patient of mine. I actually helped her get pregnant. She's 49 years old, marathon runner. She had to be on a medication that made her menopausal to take care of some fibroids or whatever. And so she was on this medication that it gives you an artificial menopause. She told me she ran the fastest, best race of her life at 49.
Wow.
She'd been doing IVF with me forever. And so her hormones, were all over the place. She was perimenopausal at the time she was doing IVF with me. And then she was really struggling as a runner during this time. But then when she went on this treatment, it was a 3-month treatment. that just drove her hormones into the ground. She said it was the best she ever felt, and it was the best race she ever ran.
Amazing.
So, you know, some people, even though the hot flashes and the moods aren't great, physically, they start to feel better because you don't have the circus going on in your body that you had before you hit menopause.
I think that the one thing that you've continuously said through this interview is this individuality, and to really understanding and listening and to honing in on what you need. And that this is not a game. There isn't a book. There's no one way. And it's really showing up for yourself entirely, whether you're in perimenopause or the and beyond part is what I'm hearing. Because it is so individual. Gosh, I could keep on asking you questions, but here we are. We're already at 30 minutes. So before I go into my rapid fire questions, is there anything that I've missed in either the introduction or things that you really want to make sure that female athletes in perimenopause and beyond need to think about, and access and resources that you want to share?
Yeah, you hit on a couple of things that I thought were really important. One you just mentioned is the individuality. I can't stress enough that one size does not fit all. You know, if you go on to, you'll get an app and it'll say, this is a nutrition program for you. You're going to build muscle, blah, 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 blah. It's cookie cutter. It may not be right for you. And this is why I created my business, Fit for Life MD. It's individualized coaching, where I do the analysis of answers you give me on a questionnaire, and I design your program based on the athlete that you are, the races you're training for, your sport, and where you are in life. And that's really the key to it all, is you have to find something tailor-made to you as an individual. Individuality is everything. Yeah. The other thing I can't stress enough is mindset. And I didn't realize the impact of mindset until I got my own coach and realized that my own mindset needed some work. I mean, as elite athletes, yeah, you guys know, and I don't consider myself an elite athlete. I'm an avid recreational athlete, but elite athletes' mindset for your sport is everything. I don't know how you ladies do what you do on these big runs that take 5 days. I think that would psych out most people. So you guys have such an incredible mindset paradigm already. When we start to see our performance fall off, that mindset can fall off too. And when the mindset falls off, well, then you might be fearful of taking that turn on the mountain bike, because fear is another thing that happens. So you got fear that's playing into the equation. You got your mojo, or lack thereof, that's playing into it. And so mindset is a huge deal, and you got to pay just as much attention to that as you do your physical body and what's happening physically. And then this body image, this body image that we all deal with as we go through these changes. So that type of work is important, is working on finding a good mindset coach.
I thank you for bringing that forward. I think that there's a lot of work available that we can access, but I think that what I love is this idea of mindset, mental health, talking about sharing experience. Not like, it's so funny because we have this, I know that you mentioned this in the Hit, Play, Not Pause interview as well, this idea of athlete, who's athlete. You refer to all of, you guys as athletes, but the athletes that are doing it don't think of themselves as the elite athletes. It's like we have this idea of who's athlete and who's not. Yeah. Just anybody that does, this exercise purposefully is an athlete in our world. Exactly. So and to pay attention to that, and hopefully, we'll get some of that in this masterclass series as well, to delve a little bit more into that. So I have 3 questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Give us one moment of courage.
One moment of courage. Actually, I gave you the answer before. I'm going to give you a different answer. Perfect. Was when I moved to Philadelphia to go off to medical school. Mm-hmm. So I came from a family. I'm the first one that ever went to college. Came from a very traditional, not very affluent Italian family. And the mold was you meet somebody when you're 18, you get married, have kids, and that's all you do. That's your identity.
Mhm.
And I spend a lot of time saying, you know, that isn't really for me. And there were a lot of pressures that were pulling me into that quicksand hole until I finally made the decision, this isn't for me. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to move out of Massachusetts and I'm going to go to Philadelphia and live there by myself at 24 years old in the middle of the city, not knowing a single soul.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a life for myself. And that, because the first time I got into medical school, I only applied in Massachusetts so that I could be close to home, you know, got to be close to the nest.
Mhm.
And then when I didn't get in the first time because I limited myself too much, I knew I was going to have to branch out. And then when I finally got in with a full scholarship to Hahnemann University in Pennsylvania, that was the crossroads. It's like, are you going to jump out without a net or aren't you? And I did. And that decision was probably my biggest moment of courage.
And you're doing it again right now with really challenging this notion of doctor, coach in, or, you know, fitness trainer or exercise trainer or whichever, however we want to define that, nutrition. And now you're challenging the whole mode of wellness again, which takes courage to stand up to institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It sure does. Yeah.
Yeah. And say, you know what, we've got to do this different. We're going to throw out the book on, you know, whatever you say is an annual training plan because it's not going to fit us. And by the way, we need to fit and we do fit and we have a place to be here.
Yep. Yeah. And that's true because academics, you know, I went to Harvard for my fellowship. I went to Brown for my residency. So I know what the Ivy League is like. And I know what the mentality is like now. My training was second to none. And the resources are incredible, but sometimes the mindset can be too rigid, you know, and maybe that rigid mindset, you know, made them very elite institutions in their own right, but, you know, nothing's perfect. And I think that's part of the problem is why you have this growing abyss between health and wellness and medicine is because there's not so much flexibility on that academic side to think about, well, maybe the answer isn't in the prescription pad. Maybe the answer is in the gym. And when you say that, everybody, you know, waves their hands and is like, I don't know what, I can't talk about that, you know. And when you go to your trainer and you talk to your 25-year-old male trainer and say, you know what, I'm having hot flashes every night and, you know, I don't know what to do. You know, my period stopped. Can you imagine what he would do? He's like, I don't want to hear about this.
You just imagine.
Can you imagine? Oh. So, you know, there is this huge abyss and it's growing the more advances we make in wellness and fitness and the more advances we make in medicine. There's just not enough time to learn it all or to even open your mind up. So what I'm trying to do is walk that tightrope with the abyss at the bottom. And I don't know how deep it is or what's in there to try to bring these two things together into a business. I mean, I've been in medical school my whole life. I don't know how to run a business, but I'm learning. I started my own and it's actually going pretty well and I'm having a great time doing it. And I'm reaching people and participating in these groups and opening myself up and saying, you know what, I'm here too. I am one of you guys. I am having the same problems you all are. Mm-hmm. And while I'm getting support from this community, I'm also trying to help this community as well. So everyone that is rallying around me in the support groups that I'm in is really helping me to get motivated that, yeah, I can walk this tightrope. I can do this.
Yeah.
And
I love it. Well, we definitely need to keep you, you know, keep lifting you up and keep lifting that voice because it's such an authoritative voice that you have and that the years and years of work that you've done. I think that there's so much more that you know, the questions, the interaction that we have will just build and build and build on your ideas because who has those two camps and then the willingness to be creative. Anyway, it's super cool. So thank you. I'm so glad that you're in this space. Okay, my second question is, that was a long one, but anyway, my second question is, what are you really curious about right now by either professionally or in your personal life? What things is like you can't wait to kind of get into a little bit more?
Well, that's, you know, essentially where I left off in the last question is leading into this question is like, how far can I take this? You know, doing interviews like this has been kind of new to me. The podcast I did with Celine was the first one I've ever done in my life. So, it's like, oh my, I'm out here and there are actually people listening to what I have to say. And then like a whole bunch of people joined my my newsletter. All of a sudden I had 100 subscribers. I'm like, oh my God, people really care about what I say. So I better be careful. So I'm really curious about, okay, I made this little leap to doing this. How far can I take this? And that's where my curiosity is. Can we really bring these two realms together? And can we really make the impact that we really need to make to change the world for menopausal women and perimenopausal women?
And yes, we can. We
Oh, yeah.
absolutely are. We totally are doing it. We're in it. We're doing it. We're living it. All right. My last question for you today is, what are you thankful for? What do you have gratitude for right now?
My family and my health. I have a wonderful husband that is supportive in every crazy thing I decide to do. I have a son who is very tech savvy, and he freaks out when I have like tampons on my PowerPoint presentation, and he's helping me animate them. He's the best kid ever. And I have a beautiful 4-year-old little beagle. Her name is Sasha, and I love her to death. And I'm very thankful that I got into fitness very early in my life, and it's kept me healthy even despite residency and fellowship when I abused myself terribly. Eating tuna melts at 2:00 in the morning. I'm very thankful for my health and my family.
Oh, well, we are so thankful that you're in this, in the industry. Welcome to the industry of
Thank you.
athletes, as however we define them. And thank you for giving us your time and your expertise for certain. And is there any closing remarks that you would like to make?
I think the sky's the limit, and we just got to bring it. We got to bring it. It's like you're at the beginning of the race. We got to put our starting line hats on and say, all right, let's go. Let's do this. We're going to win.
I love it. I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tennille.